Drew McIntyre and Jacob Fatu brawl backstage before their match on SmackDown. This is absolutely unhinged, and if you're not furious about the sheer brutality and disrespect that just went down, then you clearly missed the most violent and most out-of-control backstage brawl in WWE history. Drew McIntyre and Jacob Fatu literally destroyed the entire backstage area of SmackDown in a pre-match confrontation that was so savage and so intense that their actual scheduled match might not even happen because both men might be too injured to compete. If you think this was just typical wrestling hype, you're dead wrong, because what I'm about to expose proves these two absolute warriors genuinely hate each other, and their backstage war has put everyone in danger, including innocent crew members, other wrestlers, and possibly themselves. Comment right now if you think WWE made a massive mistake letting these two psychopaths near each other before their match, because the carnage that unfolded backstage has already generated millions in property damage and could result in serious disciplinary action. This isn't just about two tough guys throwing hands, this is about uncontrollable rage meeting Samoan fury in a collision that literally had security and WWE officials begging for backup. The Scottish Warrior and the Samoan Werewolf just proved that some rivalries are too hot to be contained. Let me break down exactly what happened, because the full context makes this backstage brawl even more shocking and even more dangerous than the initial reports suggest. Drew McIntyre and Jacob Fatu were scheduled to have a match later in the evening on SmackDown, a highly anticipated confrontation between two of the most physically imposing and legitimately tough competitors in all of WWE. The anticipation was already sky high because these two had been trading verbal shots for weeks. But the brawl started hours before their match was supposed to happen, and it started over something that seemed minor but clearly touched a nerve that couldn't be ignored. Jacob Fatu was in the catering area, talking with some of the Bloodline members, when Drew McIntyre walked past on his way to his locker room. According to witnesses, Drew made a comment, something about the wannabe Bloodline member who needs Roman's permission to breathe. Here's a trivia question for the hardcore fans: how many times has Drew McIntyre won the WWE Championship? Drop your answer below. That comment was the match that lit the fuse. Jacob Fatu, who has been sensitive about perceptions that he's just another Bloodline soldier rather than his own man, immediately stood up and got in Drew's face. Words were exchanged, heated, aggressive words that had everyone in the catering area backing away because they could feel the violence about to erupt. Drew, never one to back down from confrontation, shoved Jacob. Not hard enough to really hurt him, but hard enough to make a statement: "I'm not afraid of you or your family." Jacob's response was instant and devastating. He threw a punch that caught Drew on the jaw and sent the Scottish Warrior stumbling backward into a catering table that collapsed under his weight. What happened next was absolute chaos. Drew, now covered in food and drinks from the collapsed table, exploded with rage. He charged at Jacob and speared him through the wall, yes, through the actual drywall, into the hallway. The sound of the impact echoed through the entire backstage area and immediately attracted attention from everyone nearby. Security rushed to the scene, but here's where it gets crazy. Drew and Jacob were so locked in combat, so consumed by their mutual hatred, that they were fighting through the security guards trying to separate them. Multiple security personnel were knocked aside or accidentally hit as these two absolute units went to war in the narrow backstage hallway. Drop a comment: who do you think would win in a real fight with no rules, Drew McIntyre or Jacob Fatu? Be honest. The brawl moved through multiple areas of the backstage space. They crashed into the interview area, destroying the SmackDown backdrop and breaking cameras. They fought through the production area, nearly knocking over expensive equipment and causing technical staff to scatter for safety. Every area they entered became a disaster zone within seconds. What made this brawl particularly dangerous was that both men were throwing real strikes. This wasn't worked punches for the cameras, these were legitimate shots designed to hurt. Drew's chops were echoing like gunshots. Jacob's headbutts were making sickening thud sounds. Both men were bleeding, Drew from a cut above his eye, Jacob from his mouth where Drew had caught him with an elbow. The damage to WWE property was staggering. Broken tables, shattered monitors, dented equipment cases, a destroyed green screen setup, and at least 3 holes punched into various walls. Estimates suggest the property damage alone could be in the tens of thousands of dollars. This wasn't just a fight, it was demolition. WWE officials were panicking. Adam Pearce was shouting for more security. Producers were trying to figure out if they should call the police. Medical staff were standing by with supplies but couldn't get close enough to treat either man because the violence was ongoing and unpredictable. This was a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. What made the situation even more intense was that neither man would stay down. Every time security managed to create separation, one of them would break free and go after the other again. Drew's determination to hurt Jacob was matched by Jacob's refusal to show any weakness or vulnerability. It was an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object in the worst possible scenario. Quick question: what is Jacob Fatu's signature diving move called? Show me you know your Fatu history. The turning point came when they crashed into the gorilla position, the area right behind the entrance curtain where wrestlers wait before their entrances. This is sacred space in WWE, and the fact that they were brawling there, potentially disrupting live television production, finally caused Vince I mean, WWE management to take drastic action. Triple H himself rushed to the scene, flanked by what looked like every available security guard and several of the largest wrestlers on the roster. The combined force of about 15 people finally managed to pull Drew and Jacob apart and hold them in separate areas. But even then, both men were straining against the people holding them, shouting threats at each other, promising that their scheduled match would be even more violent. Drew, his face covered in blood and sweat, was yelling, "You want to act tough? You want to pretend you're some kind of monster? I'm from Scotland, mate. I've been in real fights with real men. You're just another overhyped bloodline lackey who thinks intimidation makes you dangerous. Tonight, I'm going to expose you." Jacob's response was chilling in its intensity. "You don't know anything about me, Drew. You think you're tough because you lift weights and talk loud? I'm Samoan. Violence is in my blood. Fighting is in my DNA. And tonight, I'm going to put you in the hospital and end this conversation permanently. Tell me in the comments, after this brawl, do you think their scheduled match should still happen, or should WWE postpone it until things cool down? What would you do?" The medical evaluation that followed was concerning for both men. Drew had a legitimate cut above his eye that required several stitches. He also showed signs of bruised ribs from when Jacob had thrown him into equipment cases. Jacob had a split lip, a possible broken nose, and significant bruising on his torso from Drew's brutal chops and strikes. Both men were told by medical staff that competing later that night would be risky. But here's where both men showed their toughness and their pride. They both insisted on having their match. Drew said he would fight even if he had to do it half-blind and covered in blood. Jacob said that pain is temporary, but respect is forever, and that he wasn't backing down from anyone, especially not someone who disrespected him and the bloodline. WWE management was faced with an impossible decision. Do they cancel the match and disappoint the audience who were hyped for this confrontation? Do they let the match happen and risk one or both men getting seriously injured? Do they try to convince both competitors to wait for a premium live event where they could build it properly? There was no good option. The decision was made to let the match happen, but with strict stipulations. There would be extra security at ringside. Medical staff would be on high alert. Referees were instructed to stop the match immediately if things got too dangerous or if either man's injury worsened to the point of being a medical concern. WWE was trying to balance entertainment with safety, and it was a precarious balance. The locker room reaction to this backstage brawl was fascinating and divided. Some wrestlers were impressed by the intensity and realness of the confrontation, viewing it as two warriors proving their toughness and commitment. Others were concerned that this level of uncontrolled violence sets a dangerous precedent and puts everyone at risk when emotions run too hot. Veterans were particularly vocal. Some praised Drew and Jacob for keeping it real and showing the passion that modern wrestling sometimes lacks. Others criticized them for being unprofessional and creating liability issues for WWE. The generational divide in how people view this kind of spontaneous violence was stark. What's your take? Is this kind of unscripted backstage violence good for wrestling because it feels real, or bad because it's dangerous and unprofessional? Let me know. The Bloodline's reaction was interesting. Reports suggest that Roman Reigns was actually impressed with Jacob's performance in the brawl, viewing it as proof that Jacob can handle himself and doesn't need protection. Other Bloodline members were concerned that Jacob's involvement in such a public and violent confrontation could reflect badly on the family if WWE decides to punish him. Drew McIntyre's status as a locker room leader and veteran made some people question whether he should have known better than to let things escalate to this level. Drew's response was reportedly simple: "Jacob disrespected me, and I responded. That's how things work in the real world. If WWE has a problem with that, we can have that conversation. But I'm not apologizing for defending myself and my reputation." The social media reaction was nuclear. Videos of the brawl that leaked online went viral immediately. Wrestling fans were split between being thrilled by the genuine intensity and being concerned about the apparent lack of control. The hashtag Drew vs Jacob trend worldwide, with everyone having an opinion about what went down. Critics argued that WWE allowing this level of violence backstage creates a toxic workplace environment. Supporters argued that passionate confrontations between competitors are part of wrestling's history and should be expected when you put alpha males in close quarters. The debate about where the line is between acceptable intensity and dangerous unprofessionalism was heated. The property damage alone became a meme on social media, with fans creating humorous posts about who would have to pay for all the broken equipment and walls. Some joked that WWE would take it out of both men's paychecks. Others suggested that the brawl generated so much buzz that it actually made WWE money in the long run despite the physical damage. Here's a fun question: if you had to assign a dollar value to the property damage Drew and Jacob caused, what would you estimate? Take your best guess in the comments. The implications for their actual scheduled match were massive. How do you top a backstage brawl that was already more intense than most full matches? How do you satisfy an audience who has now seen these two men genuinely trying to hurt each other? The pressure on both competitors to deliver something even more intense in the ring was enormous. The creative challenge for WWE was significant. Do they acknowledge the backstage brawl on television and make it part of the story? Do they pretend it didn't happen and present the match as if it's the first confrontation? How do they balance the spontaneous reality of the brawl with their carefully scripted television product? The decision was made to embrace it. Footage of the brawl was shown during the broadcast, with announcers treating it as a genuine loss of control rather than a planned segment. This added authenticity to the storyline and made the eventual match feel even more important and potentially dangerous. When the match finally happened later that night, the atmosphere was electric. The crowd was rabid because they knew they were seeing two men who genuinely wanted to hurt each other. The match itself was stiff, brutal, and felt more like a fight than a wrestling match. Both men were throwing real strikes, and the intensity never let up. The match was excellent from a pure violence and intensity standpoint, but you could see both men were compromised by their earlier brawl. Drew's stitched-up eye area was clearly bothering him. Jacob seemed to be favoring his ribs, but neither man gave any indication of backing down or taking it easy. They went to war for nearly 20 minutes before a decisive finish. I won't spoil the winner here because that's not what this video is about. This is about the insane backstage brawl that made their match inevitable and incredibly dangerous. But what I will say is that both men emerged from their confrontation with their reputations enhanced. They proved they were willing to put their bodies on the line and that their mutual hatred was real. One final question: what stipulation would you have wanted added to their match after that backstage brawl? Street fight? No DQ? Falls count anywhere? Tell me your choice. The aftermath of this situation is still unfolding. WWE management has reportedly held meetings about implementing stricter backstage conduct policies to prevent this from happening again. Both Drew and Jacob have been counseled about maintaining professionalism. There's talk of potential fines for the property damage, though whether those will actually be assessed remains to be seen. Now I want to hear from you, the Wrestling Newsletter family. Tell me in the comments, who got the better of the backstage brawl, Drew or Jacob? Should WWE have let their match happen or postponed it? Was this the most intense backstage brawl you've ever seen? Do you want to see these two fight again in the future? Should there be consequences for the property damage? Would you rather see backstage brawls or in-ring confrontations? Smash that like button if Drew and Jacob's backstage brawl got you hyped. Destroy that like button if you think this was too dangerous and went too far. We need maximum engagement. Subscribe to Wrestling Newsletter because we're covering every wild moment in WWE, especially when things go off script like this Drew vs. Jacob confrontation. Share this video with every wrestling fan because Drew McIntyre and Jacob Fatu's backstage brawl before their SmackDown match is the most intense and violent confrontation of the year. Drew McIntyre and Jacob Fatu proved that when you put two warriors together who genuinely want to hurt each other, no amount of security can keep them apart. The Scottish Warrior and the Samoan Werewolf destroyed backstage and then destroyed each other in their match. This is the kind of real intensity that reminds us why we love wrestling. The violence was uncontrolled, the hatred was real, and we witnessed something legendary.